The Danish king Frodi acquires two female slaves by the name of Menja and Fenja in Sweden, and he takes them home to grind the magic millstone Grotti. It would grind out whatever the grinder requested, including riches, peace, and happiness. But the king is so obsessed with easily acquiring wealth that he allows the women no rest. Absolutely no rest. And, well, it did not go very well from here. Fortunately, the girls have magical powers to fight this abuse, as we would also wish in this performance and productivity-driven work mentality slowly killing us all. Anyway, let's see what they did and delve into a fascinating and lesser-known Norse myth. So the slave girls are in fact descendants of mountain giants, and they end up grinding an army to attack Frodi's kingdom. According to author Snorri Sturluson, this belonged to the Sea King Missing. This time they are taken on the ship and forced to grind out salt, and they produce so much that the ship sinks, and that's why the seas are salty, a common motif in European folklore. The maidens, born from the lineage of powerful giants, initially amused themselves with rocks in the mountains, those very rocks that would later become the grinding stones they were ultimately bound to. They transform into Valkyrie-like figures, joining battles and influencing the highest military matters of kings. However, in a sudden turn, these formidable beings are relegated to servitude, tirelessly producing wealth for others. Frodi, the monarch who enslaves these maidens, embodies a deception rooted in the fusion of various traditions within the poet's description. On one hand, he represents the archetype of Frodi the peacemaker, renowned for his era of prolonged peace and prosperity. I actually have another video about this, a video about Frodo and where Tolkien got his inspiration from in Norse mythology. Coming back to our topic, so Frodi, on the other hand, also reflects a darker aspect, and this time I'm referring to a historical figure from the 5th century as the king of Heathobards, who, according to Norse accounts, seized the throne from his brother only to be overthrown by his vengeful nephews. This amalgamation of legends allows the poet to reference both the opulence and oppression of Frodi's reign. While this wealth may suggest affluence and luxury, it is attained through ruthless exploitation of his male workers, contrary to the expected harmony and benevolence associated with the traditional and more mythical peacekeeping ruler. Now I'm going to summarize the poem for you, and you can also find in the description a link if you want to read it yourself. So the poem opens with a declaration by the two protagonists of their identity, their whereabouts, and their nature. Fenja and Menja have come to the house of King Frodi, two girls gifted with foresight. The difficulty of their situation strikes a foreboding note, as the girls are taken straight to the mill to start working. The king doesn't even mention rest before hearing the slave women's song. That's why the poem is called Grottasöngr, literally the Song of Grotti, which is the name of the magic mill. They set to work, the sound rings out as they adjust the machine, and the king again orders them to work. The milling, accompanied by the girls singing, continues until Frodi's household is asleep. Menja then speaks about wealth and blessings they're going to grind out for Frodi as he sleeps in the lap of luxury. And then he may reward them even. Echoing the stock descriptions of Frodi's peace found in other sources, she speaks about the establishment of peace due to the mills grinding, so to their own work. With scant thanks for this generosity, Frodi the king, far from offering them well-deserved rest, tells the girls that they may sleep for no longer than a cuckoo stops singing, or the time it took him to sing one song. Menja undermines Frodi's reputation for wisdom when she states that he was not that wise when he bought slave girls without finding out about their lineage first. She mentions a series of giants and declares the girls are descended from them. Moreover, the millstone would not have emerged from the earth had it not been for the maidens themselves, and they had foreknowledge of the whole matter apparently. The maidens themselves moved these grindstones and sent them rolling to a place where men discovered them somewhere in Denmark. The maidens then engaged in some battles in Sweden, toppling kings as they chose. And with no explanation about how this happened, the maidens were then brought to captivity and misery in Frodi's court, where these warmongers were ironically reduced to turning the mill. Starting with stanza 17, Fenja takes over the song, and she states that they will not rest their hands before Frodi deems that enough milling is done. The irony is then revealed, because it is spear shafts that their hands shall grasp, and here she taunts the sleeping Frodi to wake up if he wants to hear their songs. An army will arise and burn down the hall in spite of the prince's desires, and she sees the fires burning already. So Frodi will not keep his seat at leire or hleither in Old Norse. She exhorts her companion to grasp the mill handle more firmly, and they are not sickened by the gore they are grinding out at all. So, seeing the approaching fate, they mill all the harder until the millstone breaks to pieces, and then the poem concludes with a short statement to Frodi that they have milled for long enough, and his fate is sealed. Now, a quick note about this king. The poet of the poem Beowulf refers to Froda, known as Frodi in Old Norse, as a king of the Heatherbards, a historical figure likely situated around the late 5th century. However, Norse records also mention another Frodi, a renowned king of Denmark, celebrated for a long era of peace and prosperity. If we examine Norse genealogies, it becomes evident that we are dealing with at least 2 Frodis serving as the progenitors of a lineage of legendary Danish kings, all bearing the same name. According to the Skjoldunga saga, or better said to the Latin fragments that are left of it, the time of Frodo I was one of peace and prosperity. As an explanation, it is stated that Christ himself was born at this time. And Frodo was burnt by a criminal named Missingus, which is very interesting because this name comes from mis, so mouse, so it may have a reference, it may bear a reference to potential vermin or a pest destroying the prosperity of the people. But then we have reference to other characters by the name of Frodo. The death of Frodo III, for example, was caused by a deer turning on him and transfixing him with its horns, and then Frodo IV killed his half-brother. This fratricide is then repeated in the next generation, where after taking vengeance on Sverting for the murder of his father Frodo, Halfdanus is killed by his half-brother Ingaldus. And Snorri Sturluson's prose setting for the Grottasöngr, which is not really in agreement with the content of the poem, is derived in part from Skjoldunga saga, from this lost Norse saga. So Snorri identifies the Frodi of the poem as the first of the Frodis, the one with the peace and prosperity, and he makes no connection with the later Frodi. And the demise of Peace Frodi is already associated in Skjoldunga saga with this Missinger character, though the latter is not a sea king there. The genealogy and repetition reach their climax in the work of Saxo Grammaticus, who presents us with 5 Frodos in the legendary part of the history of Denmark. So it would seem that we have 2 traditions behind this poem. On the one hand, a legendary history resembling some parts of the saga of Hrolf Kraki as well, used to inform the picture of the tyrannical king against whom vengeance is eventually taken, and on the other hand, the depiction of Frodi as the king of peace and wealth, deriving from a source similar to Skjoldunga saga. Both of these sources were also used by Saxo, and both may be dated to the late 12th century. The mythological reference dwells on this time of earthly paradise under the gold-milling Frodi, mirroring an early era of the gods recounted in the poem Völuspá as well, where they forged gold in plenty and everyone was happy. So the legendary history of Frodi is elevated to the level of myth through the allusion to the theme of a divine, a golden age of plenty. In Ynglinga saga, in Frey's days, this piece of Frodi arose. That's why some are of the opinion that the 2 characters might have been one and the same. There were good harvests in all lands then, and the Swedes attributed this to the god Freyr. Freyr was called by another name, Yngvi, and the name Yngvi was thereafter long kept in this family as a title of honor. Thus, the family was thereafter called the Ynglingar, the legendary kings. The Peace of Frodi is witnessed much earlier, however, because we have a poem called the Velekla in the 10th century, where poet Einar Helgason mentions that no prince had worked such a peace as his patron except Frodi. The Golden Age is a widespread motif. The Peace of Frodi is the Danish variant of it. And Frodi is in origin a title, the wise, and his particular gifts are seen to be bestowed in an abundance of produce accompanied by peace, as well as in the laws he established. In Grottasöngr, the poem I am referencing here in this video, Frodi meets his end in a hostile attack which burns him in his hall. The perpetrator is not named, but if any reliance can be placed on stanza 22, the attack seems to have been one of revenge arising out of the family affairs of the heroic Frodi, not of the Frid Frodi, the Frodi of peace. Skjöldunga saga, however, relates that Frodi was burnt in his hall by a criminal named Missingus. Possibly the poem once contained the same information between the interpolation of this stanza. In Ynglinga saga, Freyr dies of illness, by the way, but his death is concealed from the populace. He is buried in a mound into which taxes are placed and the good seasons continue. And only after this has continued for some time do the people learn that he is in fact dead. And they then ascribe the continuance of good seasons to Freyr's presence in the realm, although he was dead. Saxo tells a similar story about King Frodo III after he has been killed by a sea cow. So he continues to be carried around his realm. So as you can see, the poem presents a mashup of traditions about this king, Frodo from heroic legend. Now let's talk a bit about the slave maidens, the giantesses, because they're also extremely interesting. The role of the giantesses in the Grotti myth may parallel that of the giant maidens in the poem Völuspá, the prophecy of the seers, where they appear to break in on the happy and rich gods as they play with some form of chess game by the name of Tövlur. The implication is that the giantesses join in the game, and we are to assume they also win, which results in the demise of the Golden Age for the gods, for the Æsir, represented by the loss of the checkers. In Grottasöngr, what unfolds is a narrative of a profound decline in their social status, starting with the innocent play among the stones in their homeland, progressing to the entanglement in the politics and conflicts of humans, and ultimately culminating in enslavement to a despot. Their journey seems devoid of purpose, with their involvement in shaping the great boulders into millstones merely a happenstance. However, as they reflect on their circumstances and the events they are about to set in motion, they overlay their own sense of fatalism onto their own story, and they no longer attribute their actions to mere chance. Instead, they view their past actions as guided by their own foresight, leading to the current plight. And this reframing transforms their perceived self-humiliation into a deliberate act, akin to some kind of divine intervention undertaken to facilitate their liberation from the tyranny of Frodi. The motif of the enslavement of a superhuman being resulting in the undoing of the enslaver is also found in the poem Volundarkvida, the one about the evil elf. Like Fenja and Menja, Volundr the smith is forced to produce gold trinkets for the cruel King Nidur, while being held captive until he works his vengeance and escapes. And then the third interesting mythological element here is the mill, the magic mill. The mill from folk tales is a wonder mill. That means it produces wealth, like Grotti, but unlike Grotti, it works on its own. So Grotti is only partially a wonder mill because it requires 2 giant maidens to work it. According to Clive Tolley, we can find an analogue to the tale of Grotti in the Finnish myth of the Sampo. Its general effect was to ensure the wealth, but final destruction of its owner. Väinämöinen, the primordial sage, is shot by an enemy and drifts wounded for several years at sea, where he performs various acts of creation. The forging of the Sampo, for example. Finally, he is washed ashore at Pohjola, whose mistress undertakes to return him to his own people on condition that he forges a Sampo. He promises that his fellow hero, the smith Ilmarinen, will do this and is allowed to return home. Ilmarinen agrees to forge a Sampo, in return for which he is told that he would receive the daughter of the mistress of Pohjola. Thus, the sampo is made and provides the inhabitants of Pohjola with great wealth. The word likely has the meaning of some kind of pillar. The kirjokansi, or speckled lid, is closely intertwined with the concept of a sampo. The term kansi is used in folk poetry, according to Clive Tolley, to denote the sky. Considering that the North Star was often described as the nail of the North, it is inferred that the lid of the sky was affixed to the world pillar at the location of the North Star around which it revolved. This rotational movement came to be envisioned as a type of grinding action, referred to as sampo grinding. So Grotti may show little indication of being a form of world pillar, as this item sampo appears to be, or of carrying out its milling on a mythologically significant cosmic level. However, both motifs may be glimpsed elsewhere in Norse poems, because we have a cryptic hint of mythologically significant milling, unconnected however to a notion of the world pillar, in the poem Vafthrudnismál, though the text is obscure. So we have here Bergelmir, the last of a threesome of primordial giants, Aurgelmir and Thrudgelmir, the other ones. And in stanza 35, we have a span of Bergelmir's life. The laying in a mill crib marks the end of his life. And there have been attempts at explaining away the sense of this mill crib, lúðr in Old Norse, so that a connection with milling cannot be regarded as certain. But if we take it in the literal sense, then we have this very unique motif in Norse mythology of a giant being ground up, which is something you would rather find in Near Eastern mythology, with the example of Tammuz. The idea of being ground in a quern is also implicit in the poem Lokasena in stanza 44, where it is said of Vigvir, a name also derived from the word for barley, that you will ever be at Freyr's ears and cluck under the quernstones. Some lines relating to the tale of Mundilfari, the father of moon and sun, in Vafthrudnismál, presenting an image of turning heavens. Vafthrudnismál tells that beneath Aurgelmir's arm grew a girl and a boy together, and limb begat on limb, something we have in Norse mythology elsewhere in the cosmological tale. And eventually this begat a six-headed son, and this is presumably the son Thrudgelmir, whose name is derived from might. So where am I going with this? Well, the six-headed son can be interpreted as a six-headed wheat. Maybe. Bergelmir himself could be interpreted as containing an old word for barley. A more common interpretation sees the name as standing for mountain roarer, however. Aurgelmir is more naturally interpreted as containing aur, meaning fertile mud coming from water, and the poem recounts that he was formed from the coagulation of the primordial waters, the Elivågar. So as you can see, these giants do seem to have some kind of connection with the creation of the world, and the creation of the world may involve some kind of turning, even a turning of skies, or even a grinding of giants that might have also played a part in shaping the world. As with all things Norse, nothing is really what it seems, so when I started this video I was like, okay, I'm going to give it as an example that we can also use from a contemporary perspective, like kind of like a moral story about labor not being sufficiently paid and rewarded, but then I ended up explaining all this mythological stuff, and I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel for many more mythological tales from the Norse world. This was Irina, all the best, till next time.